I'm Seamless, and today I want to talk to you about this snare maker I made. Yeah. So I've talked about drum synthesis before, and this is a pretty generic kind of slappy, hard to clap kind of like dubstep super snare, but I don't really I like synthesizing stuff obviously, but I don't really do a lot of my own, like keep my own snares and that kind of thing. And it's because that setting up this whole synthesis process is usually kind of a pain in the butt. And someone on my Discord server actually showed me a snare maker that they had made, which was a patcher preset kind of like this that made a snare. And I just hearing those words like come out my face, I was just kind of like, oh, I should do that. Now, what we're looking at right here is basically the collection of all the things that I personally carry and use when I synthesize a snare. And under the hood, it looks like some craziness, but really this is just the work that it takes to like transport a bunch of controls up to here to do some things. But let's break down the sort of the core of the whole thing, and then also how it all got connected and all the weirdness that was required to do it. You can download this in the description of this video. Let's just move along. I'm gonna detach you. Okay, so these buttons that are called buttons up here for some reason, these are the guys that enable or disable the bits. You saw me kind of just solo them up there on and off, and this is just convenient so that I can easily like work on the individual part I want to focus on. So like here's just the fundamental part. Now these are kind of like the outputs for all the individual parts. The total parts is the fundamental two different noises in the moment they're kind of going against each other. And then harmor that's doing just kind of weird harmonic stuff that comes across as the metallic tone. And then it goes into compression. It has some kind of output sets. And this is essentially the chain I use to make and then process a little bit a snare. In future versions, I might put a bypass in here or something because sometimes I need something specific in the compression field that might not. I would basically have to go back in here and do some stuff. And the whole point of this is that I don't want to go in there to do stuff. I want to have like all the main junk up here so that it just makes the process faster and easier. So let's talk about what the stuff is. So these reverb controls, they're basically sends, and that's what this whole mess is that every individual out has two more outs that are going to the two different reverbs. One's shorter, one's bigger, and the short one is just this room tone that's got in a convolver, and then there's just fake actual reverb. Fake actual, that's a term, to be the bigger one. And goes into compression, it has the saturation, that kind of thing. And that's what these knobs are connected to. And that's just the thing you do is you just connect the knobs to the knob, and things like these modules help that kind of thing happen. I'm explaining the really basic concept here just in case people are not super familiar with how patcher functions. Yeah, and then the next bit is the stuff that actually makes the synthesis happen. So for a big snare hit, this kind of kicky activity is made basically the same way that you would make a kick, where you have a synthesized tone go down from a high really fast, and then that's what it sounds like. And then these are sort of like controlling the way in which it does that. And it's a little bit weird though, because you see this range knob, for example. You might not totally expect that to have been the behavior out of that, but it's a consequence of the way that the envelope modification is occurring to make this work. And the way that it's working is that in the thing that creates it, there is the envelope for it. And here's that pitch envelope that I was describing. Now, inside Citrus, there's this pitch envelope thing here, this actual literal knob. And am I not using it in this one? That's interesting, because I totally thought it was, but it did make it big. Oh, actually, this is why I'm not using it. My original thought was to use it, but it's a bipolar pitch thing where it increases not just how high it can go, but how low it can go. So it can go up and down. It's not just total up and down range. So I can't play the note and have the range change. That the range has to change, and that changes where the root of your fundamental is, which is a little annoying because you might actually have liked where your root was, but then you need to go back up top, and that's why there's a big pitch control to bring it back. And then that's how I decreased the range of the pitch motion, and then I had to bring it back down to get it to actually, be the original sort of motion in the root it was. Yeah, and that's happening because I am controlling the literal, the envelope knobs here. This sustain control, you see how it turns gray when you move it around, and then it goes back to whatever its position was. The envelope modifiers are the things that I'm automating to make the motion change. And in this case, I'm changing the sustain and the decay. And in other things, I'm also controlling the attack. I don't think I'm doing it in these. I'll find out in a second. I also tried doing a kick maker, and that was originally going to be the first video in this series, but I didn't really like it. I like this one a lot more, though. So kick maker 2 will be the one that's coming later. Anyway, yeah. So other controls include things like the phase control, and this is a neat sort of tech you do with stuff like this, where you can instigate a sort of a finer click by literally causing the phase to be offset. If phase is perfect like that, where the oscillation actually begins and then sweeps and ends the way it's supposed to, you don't hear that really high frequency click. And I just linked that up to a thing here. And doing anything on the Surface controller, by the way, is very straightforward. You just turn on the edit thing, and you have a large list of ideas and like possibilities. You get a control, it's there, you can rename it. And then out here, a big red node shows up. That's the thing that is that knob. It's labeled. If you label it, it'll be labeled what you label it. And then you connect it to the activated control in whatever thing you're doing. And it's just about just configuring the activity to be what you need it to be. In this case, I've mapped mod X to be pitch, volume is on mod Y, so that's where like internal level is coming in and going out and that kind of thing. And then I just named the parameters of the things as they're supposed to be. So the pitch range is the thing that's connected to the sustain knob, and that's what's changing how far down the thing goes when it does its motion. And then over here I have saturation, and that's that wave shaper you see just kind of on over here. Because a popular thing to do with a fundamental is to make it doofy sounding. That wasn't, oh yeah, because I'm already doing a clip back here. Derp. Anyway, that was the intention with that. And then there's the length one, which is that decay knob. That's why. There's the doof. It's because the pitch range was so big that it actually, I had to bring it back up there. But yeah. The bigger the range, the higher you have to start it, which is why the pitch has to increase for it to equal down. This amount of complication is why this sort of thing wasn't something I did like regularly from scratch, because I would basically have to do this to build this every time. This is a lot easier just to have this here, which is like just obvious. It's basically making a preset, really, but this is like more like a workshop preset. I don't know how to describe that. That was a weird word that came out of my head. Anyway. Length is the decay knob. And it sounds kind of like a kick, because again, that's what the snare fundamentals are. And then there's the high pass, which is just an EQ that's there. And that's because all of these processes are going to generate frequencies lower than where the fundamental actually goes. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Otherwise, like if it wasn't variable, I would have just kept a high pass there and like tracked it with the pitch, and it would have stayed there perfectly. But it's not about that. It's about sometimes you want it to be in different places, so you can make it sometimes in different places. Over here is that level control on the mod Y. This is a big mute that's on these guys at the end here. That's what these fruity balances are. And they're buttons, they're controlled like that. And I already mentioned the verbs. So that's the fundamental. The next step is the noises. So this is the stuff that makes it sound like a clap. And that's just noise. These are citruses that have a noise oscillator going into a bandpass filter. And did I put a resonance control in there? I did. It's at the very end. It's at the end there and not next to the cutoff frequency, because it was an afterthought, because I realized that that's actually a pretty big part of how a thing sounds the way it does. Because the way this works is it's a bandpass, and then it moves around in a direction, and then there's also like how wide it is or not. Excuse me. Yeah, and then the cutoff is just the filter position. Length is, so again, these are like the envelope controls on things. How speed is how fast this does this. And then direction is interesting. This is something that I actually wasn't planning on being able to even do. But as it turns out, when you move that sustain knob, the direction is literal. It doesn't matter where it is on the thing it is. If you move it right, it'll go up. And if you move it left, it'll go down. Not relative, not like if it's below the bipolar line that it'll flip and go that direction. It'll go right back up. So if I make the thing go down, I can make it also go up. So that's why there's also noise too. The purpose of this is that the two of them, when they move together like that, create a kind of activity that sounds like what we want out of these kinds of snares. And on top of that, because they're different and in different positions, they have their high passes, and they're set right now to be set to like there's a kind of high and a low that we could do fun stuff like put them in different reverbs and the different reverbs with different amounts, different level, and that is like really intense control over the tone of your snare at any given moment. And that's where that part of the tone comes from. And then this last bit is metal, quote unquote, and this is a harmer. Turn off, yo. This is honestly pretty straightforward. In the past, I would try to do this with Citrus, and it would work. And it's still the same idea: is that you just want to create inharmonic tones, because like a note sounding like a note is that all the harmonics are perfectly multiplied the way they're supposed to be. Inharmonic tones they're not. So I accomplished this with Prism, and then all the various controls that are up here are about the thing they're moving them around here. So like, for example, I have a high pass and a low pass that's pitch tracked, and this is great because when I want to be able to do, actually, let's get that EQ back up because I want to see this. High pass, low pass. There's the whole thing, and then there's length. There's direction, because again, I have a little bit of motion on that prism, and then when I said before about the way the sustain thing works, it's also true for here. And then there's distribution, which is just the literal position of the prism itself. Which also changes the direction there, because like the bits are relative, absolute, I guess. And then extra is just an engaging the harmonizer that's after the prism, so it's just adding a little bit of like kind of extra math to it. It's a bit subtle, but when you're layering all this junk together, that kind of subtlety is the stuff you want to have control over that you would not normally be able to accomplish with just EQ on the whole thing. And you can dig around with that for a while. Afterwards, we have the compressor setup. So this was tricky. I wasn't so sure this was going to work, but I think it worked. The idea is I have the curve set up so that if it's turned low enough on the pre-gain, it shouldn't do anything. It should basically be uncompressed on all the bands. And then the bands themselves, I have the split setup control over here. So here's the high split, the mid split, and then the low cut. This is because what I want to really represent is that the low bit is where the fundamental lives, the mid bit is kind of like with the first half of the clap, and the high bit is the second half of the clap. And that's, you can just change that if you need the tone or not. And what's interesting is I would normally want to have a visual for this, but it's a good exercise to actually not have a visual while doing this. Because if you can't tell if an improvement is occurring without the visual, how are you really sure there's anything improving or even happening? And honestly, a lot of times when I think stuff's happening, I'm just kind of convincing myself because I'm looking at stuff. Anyway, on top of that, there's the post, because I do want to make it compress sometimes, so then I'll just jam it into the shape there, which makes it the curve occur, and then I just bring the post back down, so now it's a compressed version of whatever that is. And same thing with the master, does the same stuff. I was going to try and get the saturation to work with the soft saturator inside Maximus, but the bipolar kind of knob capabilities of the setup isn't so obvious or easy. It's not really snapping, I don't think. So I did a literal clipping with it just a straight up wave shaper just on. It's not, I didn't even make a shape, and that's because it cuts off at 0 dB, just done in its nature. So I didn't need it to do much. And then after that is another high pass, and then straight up the level in here is the thing that is the post level. And then there's that high pass. So here we have a Snare Maker, which is essentially everything I personally use in my setup to make a snare if I'm going to synthesize one. At least, you know, the crazy sort of hard-hitting dubstep stuff. This isn't exactly something I would do for acoustic snares. But if you have any questions about this, please let me know. You can download this in the description of this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.